Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. Prosecution and defense lawyers have presented their closing arguments today in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The case going to the jury and deliberations set to begin tomorrow. Rittenhouse is claiming self-defense for fatally shooting two men and wounding a third during protests last year following police severely injuring a black man, Jacob Blake Jr. Chuck Kernbach of member station WUWM has more on the defense's remarks.
The first man Kyle Rittenhouse killed was Joseph Rosenbaum. Rittenhouse lawyer Mark Richards told the jury that Rittenhouse shot Rosenbaum to stop the protester from grabbing his rifle and being a threat to the then 17-year-old.
And I'm glad he shot him, because if Joseph Rosenbaum had got that gun, I don't for a minute believe he wouldn't have used it against somebody else. He was irrational and crazy.
The prosecution in the case says Rittenhouse provoked the interaction by pointing his rifle at Rosenbaum and that Rosenbaum was unarmed. For NPR News, I'm Chuck Kernbach in Kenosha.
New York City's health commissioner is telling healthcare providers in the country's biggest city to provide coronavirus vaccine boosters to all eligible adults who want one. NPR's Hansi DeLong reports local health officials say living in New York increases the risk of becoming exposed to and spreading the virus.
If you're an adult younger than 65, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends a booster shot only if you have underlying medical conditions or work or live in high-risk settings. New York City's health commissioner, Dr. Dave Choksi, says New Yorkers can determine how at risk they are.
In practice, this means that providers should not turn a patient away if they request a booster, so long as they are 18 and older and it has been at least 6 months since a Moderna or Pfizer dose, or at least 2 months since a Johnson & Johnson dose.
City officials say they hope this will help slow the spread of the coronavirus during the holidays. Hansi DeLong, NPR News, New York.
The Biden administration is taking steps to pause oil and gas leasing near Chaco Canyon, a culturally significant area for Native American tribes in northwest New Mexico. More from NPR's Nathan Rod.
Hundreds of years ago, Chaco Canyon was home to a large population of some of this continent's early inhabitants. Today, it's a national historical park with ruins and trails in the high desert. For years, some environmental and tribal groups have been troubled by a growing amount of oil and gas infrastructure encroaching on the area. The Biden administration's planned move, which would prohibit new leasing in a 10-mile radius around the park, would put an end to those worries for the next 20 years. A pushback from the state's oil and gas industry and Republican lawmakers is expected. Nathan Rott, NPR News.
A wobbly start to the week for Wall Street with all three of the major indices lower. The Dow closed down 12 points. The Nasdaq fell 7 points. The S&P 500 was down a fraction today. You're listening to NPR.
There was a rare sight in Washington this afternoon. The President of the United States surrounded by members of both parties. And it happened as President Biden signed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill.
My message to the American people is this. America's moving again, and your life is going to change for the better.
The bipartisan bill sends hundreds of billions of dollars to states and local governments to upgrade roads, bridges, and transit systems. For years, presidents from both parties have said they want to invest in updating the country's infrastructure, but some of the Republicans backing the bill are facing backlash. NPR's Deirdre Walsh, who covers Congress, joins us now. Welcome back.
Hi, Audie.
It's been a running joke in Washington about Infrastructure Week, which is almost always derailed by some political, snafu. So what's in this new law?
It's a massive federal infusion of money that's going to go to all 50 states. There's $100 billion in here for roads and bridges, $65 billion for broadband projects, $39 billion for public transit systems. There's money for airports. That's $25 billion. There's also money for clean drinking water projects. Help places like Flint, Michigan, where lead poisoning sickened people. That's over $50 billion. In total, this is the most federal money spent on roads and bridges since President Eisenhower. And the president emphasized over and over it's going to create a lot of jobs. The top Republican who helped negotiate the bill, Ohio Senator Rob Portman, who was at the White House today, also said it would ease inflation.
Speaking of Republicans, did a lot of them come to this signing?
Not really. Altogether, there were 19 Senate Republicans and 13 House Republicans who voted for the bill, but most of them skipped the White House event today. Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski was there. She's running for re-election in 2022. She's already facing a primary challenge because she voted to impeach former President Trump. Her political brand is really about being an independent and willing to work across the aisle. Portman, who I mentioned earlier, touted what the parties can do when they actually work together. Let's take a listen of what he said today.
We can start by recognizing that finding common ground to advance the interests of the American people should be rewarded, not attacked.
The top Senate Republican, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, was not at the White House today, but he did spend last week traveling around his home state of Kentucky. He voted for the bill and touted the benefits it would bring to rebuild a crumbling bridge there. He called it a godsend. The president made a point to give McConnell a shout out today for voting for the bill and for talking about its benefits.
So what's the disconnect there? You have some lawmakers talking about bringing home the bacon, so to speak, and then others facing threats?
It's odd. It's just this political moment that we're in. In both the House and the Senate, Republican votes were needed to pass the bill and get it over the finish line. And it does give President Joe Biden a big accomplishment. It's worth noting that former President Trump, who has been railing against this deal, proposed a similar infrastructure package when he was president. He's now supporting primary challenges to people who voted for the bill. Georgia Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene actually tweeted out the list of the 13 House Republicans who voted for the bill last week, and she called them traitors. She also tweeted out the phone numbers of their offices, and several of them are facing, thousands of calls, including some death threats coming into the offices of Michigan Congressman Fred Upton, New York Republican Tom Reed. Last week in New York, in Nassau County, police actually arrested a 64-year-old man for threatening to kill New York Congressman Andrew Garbarino, who voted for the bill. Top Republican leaders on the Hill have been actually silent about these threats, and that just shows how toxic the political environment is right now. We used to see big votes on infrastructure bills, and now it's just another polarizing issue.
It's NPR's Deirdre Walsh. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanksgiving is just 10 days away, and perhaps you're planning to brave the deep fryer this year. Well, there are plenty of examples on YouTube of what not to do, like this frozen turkey disaster.
So, how do you know when the oil is ready? Well, a thermometer is an indispensable tool, but researchers in the field of fluid dynamics have an additional trick. Listen to the sound of the oil.
The scientists were inspired by a classic kitchen tact used to test tempura frying oil. You wet the pointy end of a wooden chopstick, stick it into the oil, and then listen.
And if you hear really loud popping or crackling, it's probably too hot. And then if you don't hear anything, it's usually too cold.
Tad Truscott is with the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia. He says when you get the oil just right,
there's sort of this nice bubbling sound. It almost feels kind of like a song to some people, is how it was described to me once.
His team wanted to see what kinds of bubbles form at different temperatures and how those bubbles in turn create this sizzling song. So they repeated the chopstick test at different oil temperatures while recording audio and high-speed video.
Truscott's collaborator, Rafsan Rabi of Utah State University,